Hello. Hi, Nubita. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today for the launch of Measuring What Matters, a new field report co created by Sambodhi, Dasra, and the Rebuild India Fund. This report talks about how civil society organizations are reshaping the way we think about monitoring, evaluation, and learning. My name is Raj, and I'm delighted to guide you through today's journey. And this one is grounded in the voices of practitioners and frontline actors, shaped by collaboration and oriented toward a more trust based and learning centered future. Before we begin, a quick note: this webinar is being recorded for knowledge sharing and dissemination purposes. The conversation on monitoring, evaluation, and learning is often one that feels technical, even abstract. But what this report brings forth is something different. It brings us closer to the ground, to the trade offs, tensions, and quiet innovations that define real world practice. Over the next hour and a half, we'll hear from organizations and actors who are not just responding to funder priorities, but are actively reclaiming MEL as a tool for reflection, reimagination, and accountability to the communities they work with. We are delighted to have a few distinguished guests with us who will bring their perspectives to our nonlinear panel discussion later today. We now turn to the heart of today's gathering, the launch of Measuring What Matters. But rather than begin with a summary from the outside, we want to start with the voices of those who have been at the center of its making. Please join me in welcoming Pooja from Sambodhi and Shivoni from Dasra, two individuals who have not only shaped the research and its framing, but who have brought deep intent, rigor, and reflection to the entire journey. They will walk us through the context that gave rise to the report and formally launch both the publication and the microsite. Pooja, Shiboni, over to you.
Thanks so much for a timely start and such a warm introduction, Raj. We are all very, very happy to be here, and we want to thank everybody who's joined us for the session. So, before we formally unveil the report and the microsite, let's take a minute to remember what motivated us to undertake this study in the first place. This study is very much grounded in the trust, openness, and lived experience of the 175 civil society organizations across India. These are grassroots teams, program staff, and community leaders who, despite working in complex and resource constrained environments, continuously strive to center learning, community voice, and accountability in their work. We set out to understand how monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or MEL, shows up in their realities. What we found is a sector which is at crossroads. It's committed to learning, but often without systems, resources, and infrastructure to make that learning strategic. Yet, amid these constraints, we saw remarkable ingenuity, where tools are being adapted beyond their original purposes, where community feedback is being gathered in many creative ways, and there are new forms of collaborations emerging on the go. This report, therefore, reflects not only the challenges, but also the quiet innovations and possibilities that can help MEL move a little bit closer to strategy, to guide priorities, and to shape more inclusive action. It continues to be a shared journey amongst all of us, which has been made possible through the generosity of those who shared their stories, insights, and time with us. And with that, it is my absolute privilege to launch the report officially.
Um, Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Pooja, for officially launching the report. I hope you all took out the time to scan the QR code. If not, Pankhodi has also put up a link on the chat box. You all can scan it, you all can click on the link and download the report. And please share your feedback, thoughts, comments that you may have. Alongside with the report, we also have a microsite, which essentially is a space where the insights are stored forever, and it's a space for us to keep it interactive, for keeping the conversation ongoing, so that you all can interact with it, click on it, and then read the insights that best appeal to you. And with that, would like to officially launch the microsite as well.
Welcome to the Measuring What Matters microsite. Created not just for experts or institutions, but for everyone across the field. The content is available in both English and Hindi so that more people can engage with the ideas at their own pace. Want to go deeper? The detail page offers expanded content complete with illustrations, reflections, and audio explainers. You can choose to read, listen, or share. All content is available in English and Hindi audio, and more languages can be added as we go. The illustrations reflect the people and spaces we worked with, grounded and inclusive. They're a part of how this report speaks back to the field. This is a living resource, built to make learning visible, accessible, and real for those doing the work. We invite you to explore, revisit, and help shape what comes next.
Great. I think we are off to a very, very lively start with the launch of the video and the microsite. Once again, if you've not been able to access the QR code, the link will be shared with you recurrently on the chat box. So please download the report and give us your comments and feedback. Thanks a lot to the team for sharing the video. Now, without any further ado, I think we are good to go to move to the first segment of the entire launch, which is called Into the Light. इस सेशन में आप सबका मैं स्वागत करती हूँ और इस सेशन को मैं एक पर्सनल रिफ्लेक्शन के साथ शुरू करना चाहूंगी. Last year, I was meeting a small grassroots organization who had just submitted their annual report. Their spreadsheets were absolutely impressive. How many workshops they've held, total outreach numbers, all very neatly organized. I asked them very curiously, looking at all of this work, what is that one change you feel that has really made a difference in your case? They also thought for a moment, and the program staff then said that there's a young woman in the group who's also a CRP, like a community resource person, who now goes to the market directly, and she's also able to now sell fishes and other produce and sort of decide the right price for them. Our trainings have helped us make that kind of decision, and it has also made her more confident. Surprisingly, that example wasn't mentioned anywhere in the report. That made me think that in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or MEL, what we often capture is the what in numbers, and what we often miss is the so what in terms of real change. And that is what it is which sits at the heart of this report as well. ऐसे ही रिफ्लेक्शंस को ध्यान में रखते हुए इस स्टडी में हमने उन्हीं वॉइसेस को हाईलाइट करने की कोशिश करी है जो फील्ड में काम कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि ग्रास रूट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, CSOs, मेल प्रैक्टिशनर्स और कम्युनिटी मेंबर्स। लॉन्च के इस पर्टिकुलर सेगमेंट में हम आपके साथ ऐसी ही कुछ की इनसाइट्स शेयर करेंगे जो स्टडी के थ्रू हमारे सामने आई हैं। हमारी कोशिश ये रहेगी कि इस सेशन को हम सिंपल और इंटरैक्टिव रखें, जिसमें टेक्निकल जार्गन का इस्तेमाल हम कम से कम करें और रिफ्लेक्शंस और एक्सपीरियंसेस पे फोकस ज्यादा हो। और वाइडर ऑडियंस को ध्यान में रखते हुए इस सेशन में मैं और शिबोनी इंग्लिश का इस्तेमाल करेंगे। अब अगर हम रिफ्लेक्शंस और इंसाइट्स पे जाएं, तो जब हमने स्टडी की शुरुआत करी तो हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव ये था कि हम समझें मॉनिटरिंग, एवैल्यूएशन एंड लर्निंग का रोल फील्ड में कैसे इवॉल्व हो रहा है। क्या वो सिर्फ एक रिपोर्टिंग टूल है या उसमें लर्निंग, रिफ्लेक्शन और कम्युनिटी वॉइसेस भी कहीं ना कहीं जोड़ी जा रही हैं। इस एक्सप्लोरेशन को करने के दौरान हमें 5 बड़े शिफ्ट दिखाई दिए और यही 5 शिफ्ट हमारी थीम की स्टडी के बैकबोन बन गए, जिसमें से पहला है अनपैकिंग मेल, जिसमें मेल को हम एक कॉम्प्लायंस टूल के बियॉन्ड देखने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। दूसरा है मैपिंग मेल, जिसमें मेल के फंडिंग और सिस्टम रिलेटेड चैलेंजेस को समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। तीसरा है इवॉल्विंग या इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइजिंग मेल, जिसमें हम मेल को एक इनफॉर्मल एफर्ट से एक स्ट्रक्चर्ड सिस्टम में बदलते हुए एफर्ट्स को समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। चौथा है डेमोक्रेटाइजिंग मेल, जिसमें मेल में कम्युनिटी की किस तरीके की भागीदारी हो रही है उसको समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। और आखिरी और कहीं ना कहीं सबसे जरूरी है ट्रांसफॉर्मिंग मेल, जिसमें मेल को एक लर्निंग कल्चर के रूप में कैसे डेवलप किया जा सकता है उस पर हम थोड़ी बात कर रहे हैं। इस शिफ्ट के जरिए हमने मुख्यतः 3 सवाल पूछे और एक्सप्लोर किए। पहला कि जो सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं उनके बीच में मेल किस फॉर्म में अभी करंटली एग्जिस्ट कर रहा है। दूसरा, ऑन ग्राउंड किस तरीके के इनोवेशंस हैं जो इजाद हो रहे हैं। और तीसरा, ऐसे कौन से बैरियर्स हैं जो अभी भी चैलेंज के रूप में सामने आ रहे हैं। तो इस सेगमेंट में हम इन 5 चीजों की बात करेंगे, जिसमें मैं पहले 3 सेगमेंट्स को कवर करूंगी और मेरी कलीग शिबोनी आखिरी 2 जो थीम्स हैं उनके बारे में बात करूंगी। चलिए अब आगे बढ़ते हैं। नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज। थैंक यू। तो आज मेल का रेलेवेंस सिर्फ डोनर रिपोर्टिंग तक सीमित नहीं है, ये हम सबको पता है। जब मेल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को अपने विजन से जोड़ता है तब वो रियल टाइम लर्निंग, डेटा और डिसीजन मेकिंग का टूल बन सकता है और साथ में नए इनोवेशंस ला सकता है। और ये तब और भी ज्यादा जरूरी हो जाता है जब ग्राउंड पे जो रियलिटीज हैं वो कॉन्स्टेंटली चेंज हो रही हैं या इवॉल्व हो रही हैं। तो अगर हम ये देखें कि प्रैक्टिस में एक्चुअली वहां ग्राउंड पे हो क्या रहा है और हम मेल को अनपैक करने की कोशिश करें, तो हमें स्टडी के रिस्पॉन्स से ये समझ में आया है कि मेल को लेकर अभी भी एक मिक्स्ड पिक्चर है। कई जगह मेल अभी भी लार्जली एक रिपोर्टिंग एक्सरसाइज की तरह ही इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, जो कि फॉर्मेट्स, डेडलाइंस और फंडर से काफी क्लोजली जुड़ा हुआ है। ऐसा करने में होता क्या है कि अधिकतर लर्निंग या रिफ्लेक्शन की स्पेस काफी कम रह जाती है और उसकी अपॉर्चुनिटी भी मिल नहीं पाती है। लेकिन साथ ही साथ हमें काफी कुछ एनकरेजिंग साइंस भी देखने को मिले हैं, जैसे कि टीम्स जो हैं, जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की टीम्स हैं, वो अब फंडर टेम्पलेट को अपने कॉन्टेक्स्ट के हिसाब से थोड़ा कस्टमाइज करने की कोशिश कर रही हैं ताकि वो और ज्यादा रेलेवेंट या यूजफुल बन सके। पीयर एक्सचेंज और कम्युनिटी फीडबैक जैसे प्रैक्टिसेस ग्रेजुअली मेल का हिस्सा बन रहे हैं और मेल का यूज धीरे धीरे कंप्लायंस से स्ट्रैटेजी की तरफ शिफ्ट होते नजर आ रहा है, स्पेशली उन केसेस में जहां लीडरशिप इस शिफ्ट को एक्टिवली प्रमोट करती है। जहां तक ये पॉजिटिव ट्रेंड्स हैं, वहां पे कुछ कुछ चैलेंजेस भी सामने देखने को मिले हैं। चैलेंजेस खासकर वहां पे देखने को मिले हैं जहां पे मेल के सिस्टम्स इनफॉर्मल है या फिर जहां पे कैपेसिटी या टाइम दोनों की कमी है। तो ये जो शिफ्ट है अनपैकिंग मेल का, ये हमें ये देखने का मौका देता है कि किस जगह पे हम स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं और किस जगह पे जेन्युइनली कुछ नया बना रहे हैं। आगे बढ़ते हैं। अब अगर हम अपने स्टडी के डेटा को थोड़ा ध्यान से देखें तो ये डेटा से क्लियर हो रहा है कि मेल अभी भी ज्यादातर फंडर रिपोर्टिंग के लिए ही इस्तेमाल हो रहा है। पर साथ ही ये भी देखने को मिला है कि करीब 18% ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हमारे सैंपल ने, उन्होंने ये कहा है कि वो मेल का इस्तेमाल ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल डिसीजन मेकिंग के लिए भी यूज करती हैं, जो कि काफी एनकरेजिंग स्टेप है। आई थिंक so somebody has also said that a mix of English please, so I'll definitely keep a combination of English and Hindi in that case. So moving on, I think it's also a good time where we can take a small poll. हम आपसे समझना चाहेंगे, ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, काफी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हमारे साथ हैं यहाँ पे. हम एक क्विक पोल के जरिए आपसे भी समझना चाहेंगे कि अगर आप मेल का इस्तेमाल करते हैं अपनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, कैन वी प्लीज मूव ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड. Sure. So now we want to understand from the organizations themselves what describes how mail is currently used in your organization. तो अभी आपके सामने स्क्रीन पे एक पोल अपीयर होगा जिसमें आपको ये ऑप्शंस दिखाई पड़ेंगे. हम 30 सेकेंड्स आपको दे रहे हैं कि आप अनोनिमसली प्लीज उस पोल में सेलेक्ट करके हमें बताएं कि आप अपने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या अपने कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मॉनिटरिंग, इवैल्यूएशन और लर्निंग का इस्तेमाल ज्यादातर किन चीजों के लिए करते हैं. और जिन लोगों को पोल उनकी स्क्रीन पे नहीं दिख रहा है वो नीचे के टैब में मोर पे क्लिक करके पोल एक्सेस कर सकते हैं. प्लीज टेक अबाउट 30 मिनट्स एंड लेट अस नो व्हाट यू थिंक. I can see a lot of organizations already actively putting in the poll, which is fantastic. I think this is a good time to perhaps stop the poll and let us see what the results tell us. Okay, तो जैसा मैं अपने सामने देख पा रही हूँ, जैसा मैं शुरू में भी कह रही थी कि अभी भी मेल को लेके एक मिक्स्ड पिक्चर सामने आ रही है. अभी भी ज्यादातर लोग कह रहे हैं कि क्योंकि ये मल्टीपल चॉइस क्वेश्चन है तो रेकरेंट आंसर भी हैं, लोगों ने एक से ज्यादा भी सिलेक्ट किए हैं. ज्यादातर लोग अभी भी कह रहे हैं कि फंडर रिपोर्टिंग के लिए भी यूज किया जा रहा है. पर प्रॉमिसिंग पिक्चर ये है कि अभी भी काफी लोग कह रहे हैं कि इंटरनल लर्निंग और अडेप्टेशंस के लिए भी मेल का इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है, जो हमारी फाइंडिंग से ऑटोमेटिकली रेजोनेट होता है. तो जिन लोगों ने भी इस इनसाइट को लिखा है, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर योर रिस्पॉन्सेज. वी ऑब्वियसली कीप रिफ्लेक्टिंग बैक टू दीज थ्रू आउट द सेशन. थैंक यू सो मच. सो नाउ वी मूव ऑन. कैन वी हैव द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज. चलिए, तो इस काफी इंटरेस्टिंग रिफ्लेक्शन के बाद अब आगे बढ़ते हैं हम अगली थीम की तरफ, जो कि है मैपिंग मेल, विच इज मैपिंग मेल. हियर वी वांट टू अंडरस्टैंड कि मेल सिस्टम्स को ऑन ग्राउंड अडेप्टेशंस में किस तरीके के स्ट्रक्चरल या फाइनेंशियल चैलेंजेस आते हैं. व्हाट काइंड ऑफ स्ट्रक्चरल एंड फाइनेंशियल चैलेंजेस आर फेस्ड व्हेन वी अडॉप्ट मेल ऑन द ग्राउंड. Importantly, this issue is not just about funding. This is also about systems, role, and support infrastructure, all these three things. और ये भी देखने की बात है कि ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस इन कॉन्स्ट्रेंट के बीच में भी कैसे नेविगेट कर रही हैं और किस तरीके के नए इनोवेशंस ला रही हैं. मूविंग ऑन. So when we look at the resourcing gap paradox, we see that there is definitely not a lack of intent within either the donors or the organization to implement MEL. But the real barrier is mostly on the lines of infrastructure and investment, especially when they are inconsistent. A lot of CSOs in the sample told us that what they don't have is skilled MEL staff who can do that activity. Evaluation and learning के लिए they often don't get a separate budgeting to conduct monitoring and evaluation and especially learning. And MEL systems को design करने के लिए they often lack the time, the technology or even dedicated program budgets. इस situation में भी कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस ने काफी इनोवेटिव सॉल्यूशंस निकाले हैं which are definitely worth taking a note of. जैसे कि organizations are increasingly sharing resources between one and two organizations. They are repurposing existing tools to fit the needs of monitoring and evaluation. And in fact, they're carving out a separate budget from the existing program budget. So these are some of the innovations that we've seen which is happening on the field. पर क्योंकि ये एफर्ट स्ट्रक्चर्ड या इंस्टीट्यूशनल नहीं है, इसके लिए इनकी कुछ लिमिटेशंस भी रह जाती हैं. However, the most important thing that we need to take a note of that funders also recognize this tension and continue to remain well aware of this tension. One funder in fact told us that you can't ask for data stories when the organization themselves don't have the time or people to write them. Funders भी कहीं ना कहीं rethink कर रहे हैं कि मेल को कैसे better support किया जाए. And they have also suggested some things that they are constantly innovating with, such as they are pooling learning grants and resources to be shared with different organizations. They're providing holistic MEL support to some organizations, and they're also considering to provide shared infrastructure between one and more organizations. Moving on. Again, if we look at the data very quickly, study data हमें ये बताता है कि करीब 59% of the organization 5% से भी कम overall budget मेल के लिए लगाती हैं, तो budgeting काफी कम है मेल के लिए overall. साथ ही में मेल बजट और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन चैलेंज के बीच में वी हैव सीन अ स्ट्रॉन्ग नेगेटिव कोरिलेशन. इस डेटा पॉइंट को देखकर एक चीज काफी क्लियर है कि मेल के लिए देयर इज डेफिनेटली अ लॉट ऑफ इंटेंट, लेकिन उसको इनेबल करने के टूल्स एंड इन्वेस्टमेंट आर समथिंग दैट इज स्टिल मिसिंग. Moving on, now we move on to the third trend, which is on institutionalizing or evolving MEL. यहाँ पे हम ये समझने की कोशिश करते हैं कि how can MEL continue not to be informal, and how can it become an integral part of the organization system itself? ये शिफ्ट तभी हो सकता है जब मेल सिर्फ रिपोर्टिंग के लिए यूज नहीं हो, बट इट बिकम्स अ वेरी इंटीग्रल पार्ट ऑफ लर्निंग, प्लानिंग एज वेल एज डिसीजन मेकिंग. मूविंग ऑन, field में मेल का काम, and this is something a lot of CSOs again might resonate with. So what we have seen happening in the field, the MEL activities are often done by the program staff themselves, who continue to do not just doing MEL, they also report MEL and they also write about MEL. So there's like a duplicity of work and role that they have to do. Now, what often happens in this case is then MEL becomes an individual effort rather than being an institutional effort. लेकिन कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस प्रोग्रेसिवली अब मेल को एक सिस्टम के रूप में भी इवॉल्व करने की तरफ बढ़ रही हैं, where they are constantly adopting things like regular reflection meeting, planning processes, and decision making using MEL, something which also came up in our poll. साथ ही organizations और कुछ नई चीजें इनोवेट कर रही हैं या एक्सपेरिमेंट कर रही हैं, जैसे कि थर्ड पार्टी फंडिंग या फिर प्रो बोनो सपोर्ट, जिससे उनके मेल को एडिशनल सपोर्ट मिल सके. If we look at, so we had a separate finding on trend of technology in MEL. The details are definitely available in the report, but we definitely see an increasing uptake and use of technology while deploying MEL. पर ज़्यादातर this technology is limited to the aspects of data entry, whereas data analysis and insight generation, especially directly by the community members, is something that continues to be a big gap. Moving on, once again, if we look at the survey data, 42.5% of the surveyed organization में existing लोग जो प्रोग्राम टीम के लोग हैं वही मेल को कर रहे हैं, तो डुप्लिसिटी ऑफ रोल काफी क्लियर है. और इस नंबर से हमें एक चीज समझ में आती है कि ट्रांजिशन का प्रोसेस चल तो रहा है, लेकिन काफी अनइवन है अक्रॉस डिफरेंट CSOs. एंड I'd like to repeat it once again. The organization where MEL is driven by leadership and where it's a strategic vision, they continue to do much better as compared to other organizations. लेकिन जहां ये क्लैरिटी नहीं है और मेल अभी भी कंप्लायंस के लिए यूज हो रहा है और ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन के लिए नहीं, वहां अभी भी कई चैलेंजेस और दिक्कतें देखने को मिल रही हैं. इसी के साथ मैं पहले 3 सेगमेंट्स को रैप अप करूंगी और आई विल पास इट ऑन टू माय कलीग शिबोनी टू डिस्कस रेस्ट ऑफ द फाइंडिंग्स. ओवर टू यू शिबोनी.
Thank you so much, Pooja. So moving on, the next section is the democratizing and expanding of MEL. I would just like to take a minute over here to little bit break down this concept itself, right? Democratizing MEL जब हम कहते हैं, हम क्या मतलब है उसका? We have had the privilege of working with 175 organizations for this study. We've also done a bunch of in-depth interviews with a few organizations to understand what is it that they refer to when, what is it that they think of when they're speaking of MEL. हमें भी पता है कि मॉनिटरिंग लर्निंग इवैल्यूएशन या मेजरमेंट लर्निंग इवैल्यूएशन ये एक बड़ा टर्म है, ये तकनीकी टर्म है थोड़ा सा, बट इसका क्या मतलब होता है ये हमने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से जाना है. एंड जस्ट फ्रॉम दैट अंडरस्टैंडिंग व्हाट वी हैव कलेक्टिवली अंडरस्टूड थ्रू दिस through the course of 6 months is that at the end of the day we all work for the community. We all want that we are all in a better position at the end of the day, socially, economically, and thereby it is only fair that when we speak of monitoring, learning, evaluation, it is something that everybody can make use of, make sense of, and have access to, not just as part of an organization or an MEL team or the donor, but largely it is the community who needs to have access to what is actually being evaluated. And so this section then focuses on centering those community voices. And हमने उनसे क्या सीखा है, that's something that we will be speaking about in this section largely. And so when we talk of monitoring, learning, evaluation, we speak of systems, we speak of reports, we speak of indicators, but अगर we actually take a minute to see what MEL is, it's actually a collective practice, right? It works best when it's reflected, if the voice of the community is actually well reflected. We're moving from a top-down approach, from an extractive approach to more participatory approach. And it's more surprising to actually see how organizations, when really want to be reflective of the community, how it even shows in the work that these organizations do. कुछ examples हमें निकाल के आए हैं कि ओडिशा में काफी ऐसी संस्थाएं हैं जो उनकी कम्युनिटी को कैपेसिटेट करते हैं इन मॉनिटरिंग और इवैल्यूएशन के लिए, या फिर देयर आर ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस दैट आर बीइंग रन बाय ट्रांसजेंडर folks who then want to who sort of come up with their own progress and process indicators, which then helps them to be reflective of these community voices. But one of the things that हमने consistently देखा है कि ये feedback loops जो होते हैं, हम data ले तो लेते हैं, but it's very incomplete, right? Reporting still sort of tends to be upwards, it tends to be towards funders, and often ऐसे formats में या ऐसे भाषा में जो ज़्यादातर accessible नहीं है लोगों के लिए, जिन्होंने in fact contribute किया है इस data के लिए. And so, as one of our partners, in fact, even put it, right, that we gather so much data. And we gather so much data from women, but where does it go? Who sees it? How does it sort of help them? And these answers we still don't have, because we're still looking at MEL as a very top-down approach, but rather this is an inflection point for us where we sort of move it to being a little bit more transformative, more participatory. But, and I think sometime in the course of this study, when we were doing all of these interviews, we realized that अभी भी बहुत सारी संस्थाएं ऐसी है जो पेन और पेपर लेके इवैल्यूएशन करते हैं या कम्युनिटीज में जाते हैं और बहुत ज्यादा डेटा रहता है, लाइक एटलीस्ट 1000 folks, 2000 folks, and वो डेटा कभी भी डिजिटाइज नहीं होता है. एंड इट वाज अ मोमेंट फॉर अस टू सॉर्ट ऑफ अंडरस्टैंड व्हाई इज इट नॉट हैपनिंग. व्हाइल the push towards digitization on MEL is actually very exciting, but it is also sort of bringing in new risks of exclusion that we're not taking a moment to understand, right? Especially for staff, especially for communities जिनकी limited literacy होती है, language access या technology access ही बहुत कम है. But in fact, it is even interesting to see how organizations are largely blending digital tools with different formats. They're producing multilingual materials, creating outputs that sort of bring out community voices in a much more sharper way. And so what we found out, in fact, was that MEL is in fact taking a very steady shift in a lot of things, where gender inclusivity is in fact becoming more visible, but it is also then limited to representation or collecting sex disaggregated data. We also notice that a few organizations are then also pushing the boundaries by embedding gender analysis into evaluation. They're asking really deep questions around who holds the decision-making power, what barriers exist for women. And we're seeing also then now, with the fact that there's youth coming into the workforce who are much more open to exploring different formats of doing MEL. So while there is 100% appetite to evolve, to transform, there are those limitations which exist at a grassroots level that is really not visible to us, who then sort of sit behind broader screens. And this is then that moment where we think about how we can make MEL more participatory. And it's sort of, how is it that we shift control to sort of over what counts, who gets to ask these questions, how impact is understood, towards actually working with those who are closest to the ground. And then it's about not just collecting data, it's about building systems also, because data, if you do not use it in the right way, it's just limited to then compliance in a much more broader way. And so this becomes a very critical point, that if you are evaluating, if you are looking for outcomes, if you are looking for process, it should best then come from community, and that's where the voice then sort of largely lies. But yeah, I'll take a pause here before moving on to the next slide. Yeah. While this brings us to the end of the broader findings, and before moving on to transformations and looking at recommendations, just wanted to do a very quick pulse check on understanding from you, right? Like, which MEL practice have you been following until now, but you're now questioning? हम बहुत सालों से MEL कर रहे हैं, ट्रेडिशनल वे में MEL कर रहे हैं, बट ऐसी क्या बात आ गई अभी कि that आप अभी तक फॉलो कर रहे थे, लेकिन अभी आप उसी चीज पे सवाल उठा रहे हैं? I think Rashmi has also given a link to the whiteboard on the chat box. You can just click on it. जहाँ पे prompts है, आप उस boxes में you can write in your responses as well. Okay. Thank you. I hope you'll have all filled in your responses. We'll move on to the next section. Yeah. Which brings us to the last part of the segment, which is essentially looking at what is it that we can do then to sort of strengthen MEL entirely for the ecosystem. And I'll begin with a quote that really stuck with me that one of the organization leaders itself said when we were drafting this report, right? That MEL is not just about collecting data or writing reports. MEL का ये मतलब नहीं है कि हम सिर्फ data collect करें और report लिखें, but एक culture हमें build करना चाहिए for learning and improvement. And that's the kind of shift that we are essentially also speaking about today, where MEL really needs to move on from being reporting as an obligation or something that's for compliance to becoming a discipline of sort of collective knowledge, collective intelligence, and where we are holding everybody accountable. We know that the development landscape is changing. हमें ये चीज पता है कि जब हमने संस्था शुरू की थी तब से लेके अभी तक बहुत कुछ बदलाव आ चुका है इस सेक्टर में, डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर में. एंड MEL ट्रेडिशनली एक तरीके से हुआ करता था. It used to take place in a very traditional format where it was very specific in a format for a funder, for donors. But today MEL sort of stands at a very pivotal moment, right? If it's going to be a catalyst for transformation, we need to be able to move beyond something that's more extractive to a lot more something that's centralized, rooted in inclusion, and much more participatory. And in fact, what we noticed is we did not only speak to organizations, we also spoke to a few folks who are givers in the sector, who are funders in the sector. And we do know that there is a broad appetite for seeing that change, for being open to how MEL can be done. And we are all in that position to sort of be able to influence that change. So it's time we use that role a little bit more effectively. And here, while organizations are doing their best to change the way they essentially go about with doing reporting, funders have a very key role to play here, but as partners in shaping a more equitable and sort of a dynamic ecosystem itself. And so in this report, we've outlined 5 strategic shifts that can actually strengthen MEL across the ecosystem. And the first one, which speaks to moving on from static to adaptive learning systems, what we mean by that is we know that predefined metrics cannot capture complexity. So we need systems that are a lot more responsive, that allow for real-time feedback, that allow for sort of iteration and reflection, which means then that you embed MEL into your day-to-day work, not as a task that just comes when data has to be collected during baseline, midline, or endline phases, but it becomes something that really informs your program and program decisions to speak to the impact that you are trying to create on ground. And sort of then you thinking about developing which are contextually relevant indicators, because this really speaks to how organizations are then moving towards their broader vision that they had set out to start also. And Tisra, then we were thinking about how grassroots organizations, learning तभी होती है जब सबसे ज्यादा ट्रस्टेड हो, जब एक साथ लोग मिले. एंड प्योर नेटवर्क्स हमने देखा है कि जब साथ में आके लोग मिलते हैं, लोग बातें करते हैं, बहुत कुछ एक दूसरे से सीखते भी है. एंड सो यूज दैट प्लेटफॉर्म. अगर आपको पता है कि और भी संस्थाएं हैं जो इसी शायद क्षेत्र में काम कर रही है, तो वो स्पेसेस को यूज कीजिए टू रिफ्लेक्ट ऑनेस्टली ऑन व्हाट इज नॉट वर्किंग, या फिर डोमिनेंट जो डिस्कोर्स है उसको चैलेंज भी करने के लिए. एंड finally, जो fourth है, just to sort of bring out tools, जो platforms and indicators है that are lot more flexible, है ना, जो which are sort of locally benchmarked. And then the organization has a little bit more control over it. So isse kya hota hai, the knowledge also then sort of decentralizes. It speaks to community a little bit more. And I think then the real picture of what happens on ground comes much more sharply. And lastly, जब हम कहते हैं कि decolonization of MEL, उससे हटके extractive models से हटके we want to move to a point where we can also decolonize MEL. It's literally about shifting power, and that's what we are constantly speaking about in this report, where we start with informed consent. We start with we from the very get-go, we want to do participatory analysis, जहाँ पे communities जो है वो own करती है data, उसकी meaning को shape करती है, and use it to sort of guide the action also. And this is something we've learned over the course of time from multiple stakeholders, and not just organization leaders, but funders, for maybe people who are just sector experts also, that when MEL is sort of co-owned by people who generate these insights, it really becomes a tool for dignity and agency, and that's the shift that we are trying to make. We know that the civil society space is really charting this path, finding new spaces for learning. But it's about sort of all of our stakeholders just sort of coming together and accepting that to get to the point of real picture, to understand what is actually happening on ground, we need to give a little bit more creative freedom to design those indicators to get the actual picture. And with that, then we sort of came down to thinking about क्या प्रायोरिटीज है जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस या फंडर्स एम्प्लॉय कर सकती है मेल को स्ट्रेंथन करने के लिए, बिकॉज इट इज in our conversation with partners and funders, a common thread जो emerge होके आई, that MEL in fact cannot be external, it cannot be impositioned, or it has to be built from within, and it has to sort of come from people, and it sort of has to serve the people we work closest with. And so we thought about what works for organizations, what might work for funders. But feel free to contest, feel free to share your thoughts also at some point, where for organizations, I'll just begin with first that we start with sort of shifting from preset metrics to systems that maybe can adapt to change on ground, and where learning sort of can happen, where you can sit with the community itself and understand from them what is it that they would like to see as change. And as I spoke earlier also, it's about engaging with peer networks. You make MEL a little bit more participatory. Even if, in fact, we know that MEL is so much technical, but there are concepts, there are things that you are already aware of, जो आप as a संस्था आप करते ही हैं. For छोटी सी example है, theory of change, हम बहुत बड़ा इस चीज को बना देते हैं कि it's a tough term and it is a very technical term, but at the end of the day, it is about the impact that you want to create and the path that you're taking to create that impact, right? And how do you then sort of build capacity of your staff members to be able to just speak to that impact? So there is always, we've also learned that geographical constraints, language barriers are a big problem. But you who are best placed in understanding what your org does, in understanding what your community does, there's merit in building that capacity. हमने भी सीखा एज इवन एज रीबिल्ड, जब या दसरा या संबोधि, हम श्योर जब हम विजिट करते हैं फील्ड को, ऐसी टूल्स के बारे में हमें पता चलती है जो हम यूज ही नहीं करते, लेकिन इट्स रियली हेल्पफुल. सो देयर इज ऑलवेज मेरिट इन डेवलपिंग दोस फ्लेक्सिबल टूल्स, टू शेयरिंग इट विद एवरीबॉडी, एंड देन सॉर्ट ऑफ बिल्डिंग फ्रॉम देयर ऑन. I think for funders, we understood that it's a very unique opportunity, right, for you to be sort of co-learners, value qualitative insights a lot more. There is beauty in ambiguity because nothing is so straightforward. Even in that gray area, there is a lot that might come out that we really have no idea about. And then ये हमने देखा कि lot of things keep changing. बहुत सारी चीजें एक संस्था में change होती रहती है, but I think it's important to sort of see why there is a shift in that strategy, to sort of see a sign of responsiveness to the community as opposed to maybe just not being clear. I've mentioned this earlier also, like investing in networks, you sort of enable MEL-friendly infrastructure, and then sort of think about how we want to move from, looking at funding towards a little bit more like in complex settings, and what sort of can come in from there, because those voices are really unheard. And I think one of the underrated aspects of MEL is co-creation, participatory. We know we're all tied by formats, we're all tied by compliance, but there is truly merit in maybe sitting with the like both, I would say, donors and grantees to sort of sit together and figure what really will speak to the community voices and change a little bit more better. Yeah, I think I have spoken a lot and I will just take a pause away. But yeah, thank you very much. Raj, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja and Shiboni, for the thoughtful introduction and for stewarding this work with such clarity and care. Measuring what matters is not just a reflection of the field, it's an invitation to engage, to rethink the assumptions we have long carried about accountability and voice. And that's exactly where we turn next. We now move into a segment we are calling the Ideas Circuit, a conversation not designed for consensus but for momentum. We have invited four provocateurs to bring in distinct vantage points drawn from their practice, their politics, and their lived questions. Motushi Sengupta from One World Collab, whose long view across philanthropy and civil society sharpens our understanding of where power sits and how it moves. Paulami Mistry from Disha, whose work with community rooted organizations pushes us to confront how MEL often lends in practice, not in frameworks, but in trade offs. Sangeeta Bhattacharya from Dasra, who has held space for funder CSO relationships to evolve and who brings a deep awareness of the learning cultures that are possible when trust is prioritized. And Swapnil Shekhar, co-founder and director of Sambodhi, who has spent over 2 decades shaping big bets in evidence and measurement through bold collaborations. This discussion will not be a straight line, but that's the point. Let's begin. To open the circuit, I'd like to invite our session Sherpa, Motushi Sengupta, to set the tone for the conversation to follow.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not able to get my video on. Okay. नमस्ते, बहुत खुशी है कि आप लोगों के साथ ये समय हम बिता सकते हैं to discuss something as critical as MEL. And one of the things that we are really trying to figure out is what constitutes good MEL as such. And towards this, what we have available now is a very, very interesting concept. What we are trying to do is to sort of play out 3 different video clips which capture different aspects of MEL. Whether it is to see whether MEL goes on to answer the questions that we started to research more about, or it is to see whether MEL actually looks at efforts which are actually expected of funders. And thirdly, trying to figure out, how well are we able to actually capture co-benefits or benefits which cannot be named very clearly, in terms of the MEL frameworks that we use, and how do we actually ensure that those get captured too? How do we actually capture the narratives? How do we capture the stories from the ground of change that is actually making communities much more stronger? And in that respect, I would actually firstly invite Swapnil from Sambodhi Research, my co-panelist, to actually respond to the video clip which is going to be played out just now. So over to you, Shiboni.
My name is S. Bhima Rao. I am the founder of and the Views organization. Views is a development organization working for the livelihood and education in Orissa. Most of the times, the monitoring and evaluation and the framework is completely depend upon the project design. Most of it is completely depend upon the project design. So in the project design, so most of the project designs is mainly captures the data, focus on only output, means the immediate results. whenever most of the impact assessment evaluations are coming, they are following two things only. One is that before what happened, after what happened. You saw the baseline, you saw the before and after. So before after that only they're comparing. Before they're getting, for example, 20,000 rupees. Now their income is earned only 25, like 40,000, 15,000 rupees income only earned. Only the 15,000 income only they have seen. That much income only added within this 2 years, 3 years. Beyond that 15,000 rupees income among the tribal community, so many other points also added. You see, most of the women, they never went to the bank. They never participated into the Pali Sabha, into the Gram Sabha. The women, they never stand up. So now this is speaking. First time she told more than a road for my so one very good point when it came. Last time we did the impact test, one woman told, first time I have not asked money my husband. Okay, so I will buy a sari. Whenever I'm buying a sari, always I'm asking permission my husband, can I buy a sari? By doing this Nutri Garden programs from Nutri Garden, I saved money. That money I spent to buy sari with my own without asking me. Frankly, I'm telling you, at the time, no, I was a little bit silent.
Thank you. So I just wanted to invite Swapnil to comment on the video clip which has been played out, so that we can hear from you, given your rich experience in this field as such, in terms of the aspect of MEL that stands out for you the strongest.
Thank you, Motushi, and thank you, Bhima ji, for pointing it out so clearly and precisely. So having spent sort of around 25 years in M&E, I've become a bit more cynical than what I used to be earlier. The points that Bhima ji raised, we as M&E practitioners are also to be blamed for it, because 25 years is a long journey, and we have seen several growth paths for M&E, and we are still unable to simplify it for civil society. Is something that we need to introspect and reflect on. And I completely take your kind of point. So I'd present my story from three perspectives. The first is definitely as a M&E practitioner, and second is from a civil society perspective, and third is, of course, from the donor's perspective. From a civil society perspective, I am not a fan of you bundling M, E, and L. So M and L should be an internal function, and we should advocate for its absorption within civil society or any implementing organization. E can be an external function, and it's also a bit difficult from a capacity perspective to do evaluation. So for today's conversation, I'd focus more on M and L part of it, because that also brings M&E close to implementation, and it's easier, less resource constrained. मैंने ट्रेनिंग अपनी रॉबर्ट चेम्बर्स से ली थी, उसमें PRA से शुरुआत किया था. सो पार्टिसिपेटरी M&E इज समथिंग दैट हम लोगों ने शुरू किया था अपने करियर में. उसके बाद धीरे धीरे रैंडमाइज कंट्रोल ट्रायल और स्ट्रॉन्ग क्वांटिटेटिव मेथड्स की तरफ चले गए. बट अभी एक जो प्लस पॉइंट क्या है कि आई सी अ रीफोकस ऑन mixed design. I also see reintroduction of participatory methods in monitoring and learning, and I'm not even talking about evaluation to start with, जो कि एक अच्छी चीज़ है. एक मुझे लगता है कि अगर if as an M&E practitioner we are able to simplify the use value of something like a theory of change, that it's a dynamic document and it can be used to enrich implementation. So अभी तक बहुत ही external उसको function माना जाता है. जब तक हम उसको as M&E practitioners compliance से use की तरफ push नहीं करेंगे, तब तक तो ये sustainable कभी नहीं हो सकता है ground पे. समथिंग लाइक हम लोगों ने ये भी बहुत ही किया है कि ओवर सिंप्लीफाई किया है, जो कि भीमा जी ने भी पॉइंट आउट किया था, समथिंग लाइक एजेंसी. वी हैव सीन एंड इन लास्ट फ्यू इयर्स आई हैव सीन दैट आप बिजली का कनेक्शन लगाते हैं, उससे आप एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हैं कि महिलाओं को आप एम्पावर कर रहे हैं, एंड यू हैव मैट्रिक्स फॉर दैट. So there are and civil society organizations and many practitioners को इस चीज़ को भी देखना पड़ेगा कि how do we actually make sure that the indicators are culturally sensitive. We measure what we intend to do and nothing beyond it. So ये चीज़ था from a M&E practitioner. We have not been able to stand up to the occasion when it comes to unpacking complexity and emergent nature of theories of change, the non-linearity of theories of change. From a CSO or implementation partner's perspective, while there are capacity gaps, and I kind of buy into the document that our colleagues presented, I also see that we need to, and sorry if I sound a bit negative here, but CSOs also need to be open to absorbing feedback, because it's not a one-way kind of a push that a donor or a M&E practitioner pushes you to absorb feedback. So we have been kind of investing in making sure that we have a record on uptake as well. And if there is no uptake, then what did you do with the information? So the responsibility is not only for the M&E agency or the donor, it is equally important for the civil society organization to make sure that the findings are absorbed if they are useful. If they are not, then junk it. And third is from donors' perspective, Motushi, and you
Swapnil,
have
can I?
third. Yeah, sorry, please.
No. I just want you to speak a little closer to the mic.
Yeah. Any better now? Any better?
Much better. Much better.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Motishi, you would know about this much better than anyone else in the room. Is from a donor's perspective, one of the responsibility of donor is to make sure that M&E is a safe space. Especially when it comes to M and learning part of it. And monitoring and learning is not a reflection of your success or failure on a day-to-day basis. It's something that creates feedback loop, which unfortunately many of the donors have not been able to create, especially when it comes to multi-stakeholder, multi-partner situations. So I'll stop here.
True.
This is a reaction to Bhimaji's passionate kind of reaction to MLE. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapnil. There is just so much to take back from what you just said. Really appreciate, and I'll try building it once we have heard the other panelists as well. So can I request Shiboni if we can move to the next second video clip?
My name is Alexander Kirketa, and I have nearly about 20 years of experience in the development sector. And I have joined Samajik Seva Sadan. It's been 1.5 years since my joining. Yes, Samajik Seva Sadan, it is focused on livelihood, largely with the Dalit communities and Adivasi communities in the rural areas. In my previous experience, I would say that, the funders were like very demanding and, sticking to the books in the sense that, what is in the project, the deviations were also being, challenged. So I would say the grassroots, the ground context is a little different. And, it often brings a lot of challenges to the team which is implementing. One of the projects we are completing like almost 1 year. But in the 6-monthly report, when we were asked by the donor to report, what is the impact of the work that you are doing? It was very difficult to tell them within a span of 6 months, because we were more in the process part of it, and we were engaging with the community in terms of activities and other things, and the result sometimes takes time to come in. So something of that sort, when it crops in, it becomes very difficult to justify our interventions at times. So it becomes difficult to answer certain failures, why it happened, to tell to the donor openly or report it openly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alexander. I mean, you really point out one of the key elements that we see so common, that where funders sort of are looking at immediate results and are very strict or rigid about the way the funding is to be used. And when it comes to communities, it can be very. So I have with me today Sangeeta Bhattacharya from the Rebuild team of Dasra, and I would love to hear your views. Given the idea, what thoughts does it trigger to you? Sangeeta, are you? Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I was not able to unmute for a bit. Am I audible?
Are you
Yes, yes.
able to speak?
Yes, I
Okay.
am. Can you all hear me?
Okay.
Okay, great. Very interesting clip, and I think Alexander points to something which I can pretty much say that is a very common pain point that I think all of us have heard in different shapes and forms, right? And as an intermediary organizations who kind of works with both of these stakeholders very closely, which is the funding community and the CSO community, I think I want to speak to two perspectives, right? Which I think might be helpful in navigating situations like this. The first, I feel like somewhere the relation between a funder and a grantee, for most cases, so far as MEL is concerned, remains very transactional, right? And I think that creates somehow by default, there is a power dynamic that exists. And with that, I think there is automatically this situation or this thought that is shared, which is like the CSO owes the funding community kind of data and change, right? But I think the more, if we are to really take from again the L component of the MLE and really look at this as a partnership that exists between two different partners who are batting for the same change only with different currencies, essentially, right? I think if you're able to enable that dialogue in which then the funding community takes time to understand from the CSO leaders on what is this change about, what does it mean in terms of timeline, right? And in that, how do we know that we are moving from point A to point B in a very logical manner, right? I don't think those conversations often happen. And similarly, leaders who are implementing these changes on the ground, who are best placed to talk about the on-ground realities, for them to also spend that time and understand that you're talking to somebody who is not at the same place as you. So how do you unpack some of the very complex nuances, which are very much the realities, but what is that common language that one can use to bring that up using then frameworks like MLE, right? So instead of maybe looking at a framework that is very funder driven and is kind of imposed on the CSO, or going from just the CSO to the funders at the very last minute, I feel like both the parties kind of spend enough time upfront to talk about the change that both of them are gearing towards, to then talk about the timeline and actually use MLE as a tool to drive that change. I think some of this eases up eventually. And again, we have seen examples of where this has worked, right? But I fully understand and acknowledge Alexander's point that that still remains the majority of the problem. But one can look at it this way to hopefully ease things out a little for both the parties involved. And I think the second perspective that I want to bring in, which is very important here, is that change has different levels, right? And now a lot of when we say that, for example, sounds very simple, but to say that we want to enable girls in a certain community to enable complete their school has so many different components to it, right? So immediately overnight, I cannot impose that in a community that has not let girls study for generations, right? So how do I bring that down to say that maybe in an intervention like this, my next 6 months, the first 6 months is going to talk to the family and the ecosystem level players just to get the girl to school, right? So I feel like there is always that end goal, the long-term impact, but to be able to break that down into what it means for the medium term, what it means for the short term, and what it means therefore for the immediate activities. And I think again, alignment on those activities and what each of those activities will lead, I think is critical, because I think today a lot of the language again that we all use in conversations with everybody is either at a very input level, which often doesn't give the clear picture of what is this leading to, or is very blue sky, right? In which we are always talking about the big changes, but not really breaking it down. And in reality, all of those activities are happening. So I really feel this is a very crucial case of actually communicating, starting by breaking the power dynamic and approaching each other as kind of equals, right? That none of is kind of one over the other. It's just all of us working towards the same thing on different sides of the spectrum. So I'm gonna pause there.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. And I think from my own perspective, I feel the biggest asset that any community-based organization brings to the table is the level of trust it enjoys with its constituent community, right? And which requires the organization to stay flexible to an extent that responds to the needs of that community. So if there is a humanitarian disaster which strikes the community at a certain point in time, it is but natural that the community-based organization will be called in to support, which may or may not be in full alignment with the funding institution as such. And the point that you make in terms of, breaking the situation down into more digestible pieces and to sort of communicate it back to the funder is absolutely essential at that point in time to make sure that all parties are on the same page when these deviations do take place or are about to take place for that matter. And I think that is something that is absolutely essential. So thank you for bringing that up, Sangeeta. Shibuni, if we can have the third clip.
मेरा नाम रघु महर्षि है और मैं सिनर्जी संस्थान के फाउंडर के रूप में काम करता हूँ। हम 4 साथी को फाउंडर हैं और वर्तमान में मेरी जिम्मेदारी एज ए डायरेक्टर है संस्था के अंदर, जिसमें मुख्यतः मैं मॉनिटरिंग, रिलेशन सिस्टम, रिसोर्स मोबिलाइजेशन और सिस्टमिंग का जितना पोर्टफोलियो है उसको मैं सपोर्ट करने का प्रयास करता हूँ। वर्तमान हमारा अनुभव ये कहता है कि जिस तरीके की स्किल बिल्डिंग्स चल रही हैं, स्पेशली जो स्किल बिल्डिंग्स आपके लाइवलीहुड रिलेटेड हैं, वो एन मास और बहुत ज़्यादा स्टीरियोटाइप हैं आज भी। तो अगर हम लोग अलग अलग स्किल रिलेटेड रिपोर्ट्स को रिव्यू करें जो कि डिस्ट्रिक्ट में, स्टेट या, वो आज भी आपको बड़ा कन्वेंशनल किस्म का काम सिखाने पे जोर देते हैं। बट हम आज भी ग्रामीण या आदिवासी युवा युवतियों के साथ में ये बात नहीं कर पा रहे हैं कि क्लाइमेट चेंज से रिलेटेड कुछ अगर उनको काम करना है तो उसके लिए उनको किस तरीके का स्किल सेट चाहिए होगा, या उनके पास में अगर टेक्नोलॉजिकल एक्सेसेस हैं व्हाट्सएप के माध्यम से, घर में इंटरनेट के माध्यम से, तो वो कौन कौन से एरियाज हैं जहाँ से वो अपने आप को टीआर लर्निंग फेज के अंदर डाल सकते हैं। स्पेशली ग्रामीण, सेमी अर्बन एरियाज और आदिवासी अंचलों में आज भी जो ट्रेनिंग्स हैं, लड़कियों के लिए बात करें तो सामान्यतः आज भी वो ब्यूटिशियन, डाइटिशियन, टेलरिंग और उसी तरीके के बड़े स्टेरियोटाइप किस्म के जवाब निकल के आते हैं और वही ट्रेनिंग्स हो भी रही है। मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि वो सही है कि गलत है, बट शायद मुझे लगता है कि उन एरियाज को एक्सप्लोर करने की जरूरत है जहाँ पे हम इनको और बेहतर और उनको फ्यूचर रेडीनेस के हिसाब से देख सकें कि आज जो लड़की 18, 19, 16 साल की है या जो युवा 15 साल का है, क्या हम टेक बेस्ड कुछ सपोर्ट दे सकते हैं, क्या उनके हम क्लाइमेट रिलेटेड इश्यूज के ऊपर बात कर सकते हैं, क्या उनको और किसी तरीके की स्किलिंग में डाल सकते हैं जिसके लिए एक आने वाले समय में जॉब मार्केट्स निकल रहे हो, सर्विस सेक्टर्स में इतनी सारी चीजें हो रही हैं, उससे रिलेटेड उनके कुछ एम्प्लॉयमेंट या उनके स्किल्स के ऊपर काम कर सके। वो शायद सोच को भी बदलने की जरूरत है और उस तरीके के मॉड्यूल्स, उस तरीके के कंटेंट्स को भी क्यूरेट करने की आवश्यकता है।
Thank you, Maharishi ji. Thank you for bringing to the fore the whole issue of static versus dynamic element of MEL as such. Poulami ji, namaste. Very wonderful to meet you. So, would love to hear your thoughts in terms of, what you just saw and heard. In terms from a practitioner's point of view, Poulami ji is actually leading an organization called Diksha, and she's got several years of experience behind her, and would love to hear your thoughts in terms of what you just heard. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Before I start, my sincere congratulations to Sugodi and Dasra for publishing an excellent report. And I'm glad to share that we were the one of the organization who interviewed for this study. So let me talk about what Mr. Raghu shared. So I have been in development sector for more than 2 decades, and the point Mr. Raghu raised about the skill training being mass oriented.
Poulami ji,
आवाज
Can you
नहीं आ
speak
रही है?
a little louder or nearer? आवाज कम आ रही है.
अभी आ रही है?
But yes.
Okay. So, जो रघु जी ने शेयर किया कि स्किल ट्रेनिंग बीइंग अ मास ओरिएंटेड और स्टीरियोटाइप, वो हम लोग को भी लाइक नो हम लोग सब जो भी ये सेक्टर में काम करते हैं उनको लगता है कि ये है. So, जो what Mr. Raghu shared connect to much bigger problem, and one we often see in the development projects. So, there are gaps between what we measure and what truly matters in the people's life. And we need to ask ourselves an important questions while we are talking about MLE in grassroots organizations. Are we only counting like how many girls completed the beautician course, or we are checking whether these skills are helping them to build a career, and if that career can be last for at least 5 years. So this reminds me of the recent project which we undertaken in Gujarat with the tribal farmers. And our focus was helping the small farmers adopting better farming methods. At first, we track as usual thing like how many farmers was there, how many were trained, and how much land they farm, or whether the crop is improved. When we spend time with this farmer, we began to see something new and really change what happened. And change we had not been measuring. So they were learning how to deal with the unpredictable weather. They were diversifying their crops to reduce the risk. They were building a network to share knowledge with each other. So this is exactly the issue Mr. Raghu has raised, that we have been measuring like crop yield, but we were missing out the bigger picture. The farmers were becoming more adaptable. So, and in the same way, many skill programs focusing on the counting, training, certification, but they miss asking the crucial question: are young people truly ready for the tomorrow's job market? This video raises an important point like, can we teach rural youth about the technology or climate related work? So Mr. Raghu is really asking another question. So, are we preparing our youth for job that exist 5 years from now? And what about the 10 years from now? So this point to three big changes we need to make in how we track success. First, we should not just count the activities. We need to ask, are people become more adaptable? Can they respond to the economic opportunity that do not even exist today? And is our project giving them the knowledge and skill that will need to be ready for future? So let me start by asking what young people can do. What skill do they already have? And what can the local industry or the local ecosystem offer them? When we talk about the employability, we should not just think about today. We should measure it at least for next 5 years. Because it would be a mistake, maybe a disaster, or assume we already know what is best for them. Can our project collect micro level data? And can this data actually help NGO to set the right milestone and goal? We also need to track people's career and livelihood over many years, and not just check whether they got a job right after the training, but we have to ask, can we build an internal system that track whether goals are achieved, not just whether activity are completed? So I really appreciate Raghu's point. He's not saying that traditional skill like tailoring are bad. What he's asking is this: are we truly preparing our young people for a world that changing faster than ever? And that is a big question. It is a complex and it's important. So I believe better ecosystem tracking and strong project evaluation can help us to find the answer. But I'm curious what we all think, and how can we change a measurement system? Can we capture whether we are preparing people not just for today, but for the future? And how do we balance the need to show quick result with the need to invest in long-term readiness of the change? Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you so much. There was just so much of rich data there from the three panelists that I had. Very quickly summarizing, I think, talking about how we end up oversimplifying the monitoring and evaluation framework. I think that is something that came through in Swapnil's comments. Again, looking at quick returns, trying to figure out ways by which we can keep the gathering of data and the analysis of that information culturally sensitive. I mean, these are all important elements that I think are coming through. And also seeking immediate results. How do we actually make sure that we take time out to communicate the real issues between the organization on the ground and the funders, how that becomes a very important part to this. And the third piece, I think, Koji, that you really brought forward was to say, how can we keep the MLE function to be future oriented as well? How do we break um, the static mold to include elements which also look to the future? So this is not because the problems that most of these organizations are working with are not, they themselves are evolving as we speak. So how do we actually create and develop ML system that can help us do that? So I think, thank you for sharing your views as such. I do have one set of one question of each of you in terms of looking back into your own careers. If you could cite one single instance where you have found that a MEL exercise has led to a significant change. And this could be a change in a relationship or within the organization or your perspective on a particular program or with the communities or in the way that you are trying to measure outcomes from a particular project. So I will invite each of you to share one significant change in your experience. Let me start with one that has stayed with me when I was with MacArthur Foundation. So as many of you know that, we had a very strong portfolio of SRHR interventions that were supported by MacArthur. And at one point, this was between 2014 and 15, when we went for an evaluation of the SRHR program, one of the significant findings that we had was to say that there was reasonable level of government support for the problem that the foundation had started its journey to cover when it did 10 years back before then. So following the 1995 ICBT conference, it was decided, the idea was to look at SRHR as an area of input where, we could actually bring in different actors. And by 2014, there was enough government buy-in to the concept as such. And the evaluation report actually helped us identify that. It also helped the organization make a choice to say that since the original question had been reasonably addressed because of larger buy-in by the government, we should probably be looking at different sets of issues to focus. And that was one of the considerations that went into MacArthur's own change of direction from SRHR to climate change in India. So that was hugely impactful for us in that sense. So I would love to hear thoughts from you. Let me go the other way around. Poulomi, if you would like to start.
Oh, thank you. So we are from the grassroots organization, and there are a lot of things we would like to share. So sadly, one thing is very difficult, but working from last 2 decades in the development sector, so I can recall so many stories, collective and individual, when I think about the monitoring and evaluation. And in the end, what we really stay with us are the high impact and social change we have enabled together with the donors and organization. So if I share, when Kalubai says he got his forest land because of our intervention, along with another 182,000 farmers in Gujarat, or when Ramila Ben tells us how she received a widow pension, which has doubled at micro level, benefiting 120,000 in single women, or when Geeta proudly says that she is now graduated because of Disha supported her with scholarship for the higher education, or when Mukesh says that I am now Sarpanch because I studied in the Nagrik Shala, and just like my other 12 friends who were elected this year in 2024 in their respective villages. So for me, like, let me say that Emily is not just the data or the numbers. Emily is a story, and the story worth telling and spreading and to inspire many more. That's what I share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Polumi. Anjali. This is really helpful for us to bear in mind as we move forward. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Sorry, it's happened now. There was some problem. Wasn't able to undo. I think very difficult to think of a story after what Poulomi shared, but I think one of the personal ones that has stood out for me is, I think, again, it was one of the site visits that I was doing kind of early stages of when I just joined the development sector. It was one of my first few site visits. And in fact, through that visit, the idea was that we wanted to understand what the impact of the organization was. How has it changed the lives of the community? And this was an organization working in the area of sanitation in the rural side of Tamil Nadu. And we had to report this back to a funder and kind of, take it. And this would have impacted the investment that the funder made, right, in sanitation. So I had gone in thinking first, very new into the sector, understood all the indicators, understood all the activities and all. But when we went to the community, some of the focus group discussions that we did through a course of like 2 to 3 days, I think one of the last few meetings in which we were trying to understand from the community, just in their language, what the change was like, right? In that, one of the families, the way they spoke about, which I didn't understand in the language because they spoke in Tamil, which wasn't translated to us. But in that, they spoke about how the fact that the girl who was like a 12-year-old girl in one of the villages was able to attend school finally after a lot of the work that the community did on building a toilet, because otherwise the girl was not able to attend school. And for that family, how that was one of the biggest things that this funding had enabled. And again, it took a while for me to understand because a lot of us did not understand. So the team had to do the full translation for us. But I think in a way, very fortunate that from very early on in my journey in the sector, I think this whole angle of stories are very real, very grounded. And that's how we need to talk about. Emily has kind of then stayed with me since. But that was the visit that did it.
Thank you for sharing. Really powerful. Yeah. Swapnil, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So Emily, I'm a practitioner, so my example would be a little boring than what Sangeeta or Poulomi discussed. But as Emily firm, our biggest high is when we are able to inform policy, because that leads to transformational change if it is like absorbed into policy. So in early days, there were a couple of occasions which were kind of a highlight of Sambodhi's presence, and our work informed watershed guidelines in the country. Our work informed Manrega guidelines as well. So those were the high points, because that's why we exist and our work exists. But beyond that, because this is about rebuild as well as much, and the group of civil society organizations, so I'd rather bring an example from a collaborative, which wasn't called collaborative sort of 10 years back, but so where we had people from investors coming in from private sector, from philanthropy, from civil society, from academic institution, and we were the M&E, and we were the bad guys in the room. And how we actually created a platform where folks started sharing information, and a civil society organization which is implementing in rural a mini grid program in rural UP can engage with a banker sitting in the same room, and both value data that is being produced. So that journey from a kind of no one in the room to creating value for data, which gets absorbed every week in program implementation by financiers, by private sector, by philanthropy, was a high for us as an institution. So I'd stop here because this is something that for Rebuild or because the world is moving towards collaboratives, world is moving towards partnerships. Here, incentives matter. Here, what you bring to the table, how there is a healthy competition between partners. So M&E has to play a critical role in consensus building as well. We cannot be conveniently placed as an external entity which is detached from project implementation. So this is something that I got out of that experience of mine. I stop here, Mautish.
Thank you. I think my internet is a little unstable at the moment, but thank you for the gathering of data and information from all my, I think, especially to Swapnil's point, I think gathering M&E data from a collaborative point of view is really a very different ballgame altogether. So I think the fact that you sort of brought that out really opens up a new space altogether as such. I'd just like to thank my panelists for the rich insights that they have brought to this conversation. And when we started talking about this format for bringing in different perspectives, personally speaking, I was trying to figure out how best to use the set of skills that I have around me, and I'm glad that this has come out through the different perspectives that my co-panelists have brought forward. So I think the various elements of M&E that were highlighted, I've already spoken about before. And now with that, I would like to hand over back to Shibona. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Motushi and Swapnil, Sangeeta, and Paulmiji. This was really insightful. I'd just like to pass this on to Raj right now, who will take this segment forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Motushi, Paulami, Sangeeta, and Swapnil for a conversation that was sharp, unflinching, and deeply grounded. To close us out, I now invite Rajiv to share a few insights and take us into what comes next.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you so much. So, dear colleagues, we have been saying from the start that today's launch is just not an end point. It's about starting a new chapter. So, what we have shared in measuring what matters is not just a final word. It's an invitation for all of us to keep talking, keep questioning, and keep experimenting. So over the next few weeks, we'll see the work show up in many different ways through op-eds, where we'll carry these provocations into public domain, then infographics, visual stories, designed to make these insights accessible across various platforms, and other companion pieces and reflections that dive deeper into specific tensions surfaced by the report and in today's discussion. We'll also be taking these conversations to other rooms, sector meetings, funder gatherings, practitioner networks, because honestly, this can't be a conversation that happens just once in just one place. So we hope that measuring what matters goes beyond improving mail tools and frameworks that helps us grow stronger learning cultures in civil society, places where reflection, evidence, and adaptation are not side activities. They're part of how we work every single day. I'm also very happy to see Sinjini here with us today. She was our key motivator behind initiating this joint study almost a year ago, and remained closely connected with the research team throughout. I would also like to thank all speakers and panelists, Motushi, Swapnil, Sangeeta, and Paulomiji. Special thanks to Anuprata, Shiboni, Pooja for curating today's interactive session, and also behind the scene, Pankhuri and Rashmi, the joint comms team. Before I hand the mic back to Raj, may I request everyone to please switch on your cameras for a group screenshot? Sinjini, if you are there, please turn on your camera too, please. Everyone, speakers and panelists, please join in. So Pankhuri, Raj, you are taking a shot, no? Please let us know when it's done. Is it done?
Yes, sir. Just a second, sir. Actually, we have to
Okay,
remove
okay,
it.
okay. Just let us know when it is. I think several, maybe couple of pages, perhaps.
Rajiv, it's done. I think we can move
Thank you
on.
so much. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you once again for being part of this beginning. And what to you, Raj?
Thank you, Rajiv. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. To our panelists, contributors, collaborators, and all of you who showed up with such care and curiosity, we are grateful. Measuring what matters is now live, not just as a report, but as a conversation we hope will continue in your organizations, your network, and your practices. Until then, thank you. Take care and keep measuring what truly matters.